guys, this is Christy Lewis from Dostoevsky in Space, and today I'm here with my 15 most disappointing books of 2019. Why do you want to hear about the most disappointing books? I don't know, but I just like to complain a lot, so here we are. I'm just kidding. I'm not even saying that you guys should really stay away from these books, because honestly, they're not bad books. Not all of them. Most of them are not bad books. It's just that, for one reason or another, I personally found them disappointing. And just FYI, I am going to look different halfway through this video. Sorry about that, but you're probably used to it by now. It's just a thing that happens here. So let's get started. The first book that disappointed me this year was Starsight by Brandon Sanderson. This is the second book in the Cytonic series, which is a young adult sci-fi series. Brandon Sanderson has been, for a few years, my favorite living writer, and that is because he just has this way of incorporating religion and philosophy and really imaginative, wondrous things in his fantasy novels. And I had just never seen anything really like him in the modern day. I just love that he interacts with religion because he's a Mormon. There's a lot of really good Mormon speculative fiction writers. Skyward, book 1, was like one of my favorite books last year. Skyward is all about Spensa, who is a teenager who wants to be a pilot like her dad. The remainders of humanity from some intergalactic war that we don't know anything about when the book begins are living on a planet called Detritus. She wants to go and fight the aliens who have been fighting them her entire life, just like her father did. Unfortunately, right after she last saw her father when she was, I think, 10 years old, he went off on his flight crew and ended up shooting a bunch of them, and that kind of puts a stain on the family honor. And so she grows up with this stain on her honor and this really strong drive to overcome that. She wants to regain her family's honor. And she discovers a lot about herself and the Cytonic powers. It was so full of plot revelations, twisty-turny, the best Sanderson writing I've ever encountered. I love recommending this book, at least I did before I read the second book, to newcomers who have never read Brandon Sanderson before. His character development was growing. Starsight, it's not like it was a bad book, it just wasn't phenomenal like I expect from Brandon Sanderson. I gave this book 3.5 out of 5 stars. His style seems to be changing in the sense that he's becoming more political, less philosophical. It's not like there's no character development, there was a lot less. It wasn't what I was expecting. I thought maybe we would hear more from the characters that we met in the first book, but instead we meet a whole roster of new characters, and at least a couple of them were constantly being referred to in very political ways. His focus on that kind of distracted from some other things, but that wasn't the biggest problem. That's just, I think, a direction that his writing is going that I'm not a huge fan of. The other problem was that the plot just didn't surprise me, and if Brandon Sanderson's plots stop surprising me, I'm going to have very little reason to value him above other authors, because his revelations were really what always got me. I never expected the outcome of his books. I guessed every single big plot twist, and there were a few like kind of smaller things that still surprised me that I enjoyed, but it just wasn't as good as I was expecting. I do have an even more full review of this coming up that I have recorded and have not edited or published yet on YouTube, but it is coming. So if you want to know more about this book, I will tell you about it there. And the next book that we have is Notes from the Underground by Dostoevsky. Now, of course, I love Dostoevsky, and that hasn't changed. However, this book, to me, was a lot more difficult. I think it just hasn't aged quite as well for me as Crime and Punishment did. This one was a little bit less about character and a little bit more about social movements in Russia in the 19th century, and unfortunately I'm just not like super familiar with those. So the problem is really with me, not with this book. It's just not very accessible for me, which I know is a very millennial kind of complaint. Not that everything I read has to be easy, but man, I should have prereqed this review with, if you're not a millennial, you can ignore. But it did disappoint me because Crime and Punishment I was really nervous about going into. It was like the first giant classic I'd ever read, and I was just like, okay, grow up, Christy, tackle it. So I did it, and I was just amazed at how easy that one was to read. And this one, the exact opposite. What's going on is, in the first part of the book, our unnamed main character giving a rambling critique on Russian social utopianism, and he essentially tried to live his life according to the various intellectual standards of each wave of the 1840s and the 1860s. There was sentimentalism and then utilitarianism, and he tried to live his life according to their standards, and his life turned out to be a mess, and he blames it on that, understandably. And the second, like, 2/3 of the book is about him telling a story about how that happened, how he came to that perspective on Russian social utopianism. That part was really good. I did not really enjoy exactly because it's not a happy story. However, he does show us why living out that thought didn't work for him. He's 40 years old when he's telling us this story in the future, looking back on his past when he's like 25 and saying, this is the crap that happened to me because of social utopianism. So I did think it was brilliant, but to me it was still a disappointment because I just was like, I don't understand. I had to do a little research for sure to even understand what was going on, and the first bit of this was really, really hard to get through. But thankfully that portion isn't like humongous, it's just, I don't know, 30 or 40 pages, and that was a lot for me of ramblingness. It was really just hard to follow. I think it's stream of consciousness is what it's called. He's intimidating, okay? He's a smart guy. I do have a dedicated review video of this coming out, so if you want to know more about it, that will be coming up soon. Watch out for it. And then we have the 5th season by N.K. Jemisin, which you cannot say is not brilliant. I'm glad I read it. However, I was disappointed about it because I went into this expecting that I was going to find a favorite new series. It's literary sci-fi, dystopian, kind of broken world future where there are these seasons of climactic disasters happening called 5th seasons. They break the world apart and pretty much kill off 99% of populations and totally destroy civilizations. The remainders of the people over time build back up, and a caste system kind of has developed in the current off season that we are living in. And we're seeing it from 3 different perspectives of different women and a girl. They're all very touching and completely riveting right from the beginning. The world building is really what pulled me through this book. It's not like I didn't enjoy it. My problem with it was there is one scene, yes, pretty much one scene ruined it for me because I'm just not really wanting to read more of it in the next book. In this book, there was one scene of, it just embarrasses me to even talk about it. It's a pretty graphic sex scene by a bisexual polyamorous couple of 3. It just makes me uncomfortable to read that. I mean, the whole book makes you uncomfortable because it's just really horrible what happens in the book. But I loved the rest of it because to me it was like truth that I need to hear, places where my imagination should go. That really gave me a lot of empathy for people. But this scene to me was like, I didn't need that. And I don't want any more of it, even though I feel like this was a really unique vision and a really unique book, and I'm really disappointed that I'm not going to continue reading it probably. I definitely wouldn't say don't check it out, but to me it was disappointing because I really wanted this to be a favorite new series for me. I know that that's kind of a thing of modern literature where there's more showing, shall we say? But you know, modern literature isn't my favorite, and that's part of why. I just don't feel like it's always necessary. I'm not telling authors, stop putting stuff in your book. Like, obviously stay true to your vision, but I'm definitely more of a older classics type reader because I feel like there can be truth and beauty without that. And then we have Midnight's Children by Salman Rushdie. Now again, not necessarily a bad book, but not the right one for me. This one follows a VIP named Salim Sinai. At least he's a VIP in his own estimation. He is the narrator of this story, so there's a storyteller. We're not in the time that he's talking about. He goes way back, way before his birth, and he's narrating all the events that kind of lead up to his birth, and you're kind of wondering, is this dude like such a narcissist or what? But he's actually tracking the power, I think, that comes from his great-great-grandfather. Part of his power is that he can look into the past. Unfortunately, I just didn't have a lot of character connection to him or to the other characters. They felt more like clever inventions than people, really. And I really need a strong character to kind of connect with. Not that I necessarily agree with everything he's doing or think he's the best person ever, but I want to have some empathy for somebody in the story. And for me, I just could not find that here, and I was reading it at like 20 pages an hour. That's slow even for me. I mean, I'm a slow reader, but man, that is a slugging pace. And for me, eventually, if a book is taking me that long to read, I just kind of have to look at it and be like, is it worth taking 2 more weeks, reading this with all of my spare time just to try and finish it when I'm not even enjoying it? Probably other books that I could enjoy more and learn more from. I just kept getting lost in it. It's almost like with Notes from the Underground, where you're like trying to follow this guy's thoughts, and it's kind of like, wait, what was that? I probably got like 3/4 of the way through it too, so I was really disappointed to give up on it. Maybe I'll try the audiobook. I don't think I can follow it on audiobook, so that's probably gonna be a problem. It's not like you can't follow it, but it takes a lot of attention. And then we have 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea by Jules Verne. Now this one I actually enjoyed the entire time I was reading it, and there are some really wonderful scenes that I marked up quite a bit of. I did enjoy reading, particularly when they discovered Atlantis and they're walking around under the sea, and there's a lot of moments of really fun discoveries in here, and I think that is what science fiction does best. However, part of what was pulling me through it was the mystery behind Captain Nemo. This story is about, there's some kind of monster in all of the oceans. It can pop up anywhere. It could be in the Arctic at one point, and then it could be in the Indian Ocean a couple days later. Whatever it is, it's freaky, it moves fast, and it does damage ships. There's like worldwide panic about this monster, and a ship is sent out to track it down and kill it. And 3 of our heroes on this ship accidentally go overboard, and they end up inside the monster, which actually turns out to be a ship piloted by this mysterious Captain Nemo and his very loyal crew. We sort of get hints about Captain Nemo's past and why he and his crew are just cruising around under the ocean, secretly with all of this crazy technology that nobody else has, but you don't really find out anything in this book. I was reading the entire time to find out, what is this mystery that Captain Nemo doesn't want to tell anyone? What's going on? What happened in the past? Sadly, we don't find out. In fact, I found out after finally finishing this and throwing it across the room that there's another book called The Mysterious Island where Nemo reveals all his secrets. I was reading for that purpose. I'm not gonna go read a whole other book. The other thing about this book is there is a lot of really technical sections that you can just kind of skip over. For me, it really wasn't a problem. This is actually the children's abridged version, which I didn't realize when I picked this up. I got like almost to the end, so I basically restarted it because I was like, well, I don't want to miss anything. So I reread the whole thing. That may be part of why I was so annoyed when I finished this book, because I read it and then reread it just so I could find out about Captain Nemo, and then I didn't. However, there were some really beautiful quotes in the full version, and I should have looked them up before making this video. Duh. That was dumb. Again, a case of having expectations that were wrong for this book. We also have Lost Roses. I read this because I got it from my library. There was some ARCs available from my boss, and he was like, you want them? And I was like, heck yeah, I do. I picked this up because gorgeous cover, right? And also, there was a lot of expectations that it was going to be really good, and when I read the reviews later, I was shocked because they all said that it was good, and to me, it was like, just okay. The setting was good, but the characters, I mean, I was reading an ARC, so it's possible that some of that got revised, but to me, there were so many character relationships that just were kind of set up to have problems and then just didn't really have the problems. They got kind of skipped over. So there's 2 characters. There's a woman in America and then there's a noblewoman in Russia. And they are friends, very good friends. I think they met in France. And then the Russian Revolution happens, cutting short the trip of the Americans who had traveled to Russia to spend time with the noblewoman. And then the noblewoman's family gets attacked because Russian Revolution hated the nobles. So I mean, that's a pretty cool setup. There was a lot of cool like historical things and plot moments happening, and I did enjoy that aspect of it because ever since I read Crime and Punishment, I've been like, Russia, tell me more. But the character moments, like I said, one woman kisses another man, and I expected there was going to be some problems with her husband. She had kind of hinted that there might be. The other woman has big problems with her daughter, like major problems, where I was like, oh no, there's going to be like some kind of drama there, and they're going to have to resolve it. And the mom's being so childish, she's going to have to apologize, and none of that happened. And it was like, life's not really like that. If you have a big problem with your daughter, you guys just ignore it. It's not just gonna go away. And same thing in a marriage. To me, that was a disappointment. I can't remember if I gave it 3 stars or 3.5 stars, but this would be one of the ones where I wouldn't say, well, it's not a bad book, but it's like, really, there should be better characters. It was like really disappointing to me that the characters didn't actually have arcs. They changed, but they had like some really big character issues that just didn't get addressed at all. And to me, that is a major failing of a storyteller. If you set up a character problem like that, you should definitely address it in some way. I just had no emotional connection to the work beyond the setting. And then we have the Odyssey, which I read in an online Coursera class on Greek and Roman mythology, which I loved. It was a fantastic class if you ever get a chance. However, I wasn't as big of a fan of the Odyssey. I liked the imagination behind it. I did read the whole story. It was a bit of a slog. It wasn't exactly easy reading for me. But the big problem for me was Odysseus. I'm not a big fan of the Greek hero and all the things that he's supposed to be, as opposed to the Roman hero, which I like a lot better. The Greek hero is supposed to be like crafty and sneaky, and he can sleep with as many women as he wants, apparently, and get plenty of people killed, apparently, and still be a hero. He's supposed to be clever and really strong, but to me, he taunted a Cyclops and got all his men killed. Like, how is that clever? That's not being a good leader. And also, sleeping with every woman that you come across, and then, like, going home to your wife and being like, you better have been faithful for the 20 years I was gone without word, sleeping around. And if you weren't, then psh. So really, the story is about Odysseus and his men are on their way home from the decade-long Trojan War, and King Odysseus is heading back home, and they end up getting caught up into a load of trouble from the gods for various reasons. And like I said, I did enjoy a lot of the adventures and the creatures. I loved the siren part of it. That actually inspired a short story for me a few years ago. I'm glad it was written because the Aeneid was written because of it. So without the Odyssey, there'd be no Aeneid and I would be sad. Next, we have Till We Have Faces by C.S. Lewis. This is a retelling of Cupid and Psyche, and it follows two princesses who are sisters and live in a palace in Galome with their kind of evil father and a kind of cool Greek tutor and a bunch of soldiers. Now, as is typical with C.S. Lewis, it is very argumentative. There's a lot of really interesting world-building details, and atypical of Lewis, fiction anyway, is it's not super... I can't think of the right word, but you know how like in the Chronicles of Narnia, even though he didn't set out to tell an allegory, it kind of felt like one because the Christian worldview was like aligned so closely with the mythological imagery. Well, in this book, it's not like that at all, because there was no Christ at the time that this story is taking place. This is near probably the Trojan War, would be my guess. While all that was really interesting, I did not have an emotional connection to this book or to its characters. I'm used to just like loving C.S. Lewis and having all his books be like out of the park hits with me, but I guess I got spoiled by A Grief Observed, where C.S. Lewis just totally bears his heart. I was really expecting a lot from this one, because this year I also listened to the audiobook. I forget what it's called. I'll put it here for you, the cover. But it's about the woman who married C.S. Lewis, Joy. She is lovely. It's told from her perspective, and they write this book together during that book. And she was like, this is your best work ever. You know, and she just had a lot of input on it. And you can see her input because the main character, Orual, the older sister of Psyche, who is her younger sister, she loves her sister so much, and she's just so very human. And I did love the character of Orual with all of her faults and character development. There was a lot of good things to like about this book, but I thought, oh man, it's gonna be the best ever, and it just really wasn't the best. Not to say it wasn't good, I still gave it 4 stars. We had a humongous discussion about it in my Christian Critics book club on Facebook. One of my friends and I got on Skype and we talked about it, and it was a great discussion, but it was kind of confusing. That was another complaint that we had about it. There was a lot of metaphor, and it just wasn't clear. Like, it was the opposite of Chronicles of Narnia, where everything is pretty clear. This one, I had a hard time understanding the connection between the older sister Orual and the goddess Ungit, who is supposed to be like a Babylonian version of Aphrodite. I didn't realize he had a retelling of the myth in the back of the book. It says note, and then it has the myth here. And I had never read the myth, so I didn't know what was going on the whole time I was reading this. That was part of why I didn't enjoy it as much, because I was like, what's going on? Although there was one plot event that I knew was going to happen, and I was dreading it happening, and I was just waiting, and it doesn't happen for like a really long time. So I kind of wish that it happened sooner and we'd spent more time kind of in the aftermath of that for the book, but that's not what the book was about. C.S. Lewis spent a lot more time kind of building up to that, and it just wasn't what I expected. And then I have a few other books that I didn't really enjoy, and these are the ones that I'm just gonna spout off and not really talk a whole bunch about, because I just didn't have a lot to say about them. I didn't think they were that great. There were the sequels to Howl's Moving Castle, Castle in the Air, and House of Many Ways. Now, while these are probably still good for children, for me as an adult reading them, meh, they don't really involve Howl that much. They didn't stand out to me. One is a retelling of Aladdin, and the other one is like more of a traditional fantasy. I have read some of the Chrestomanci books, and I loved the first 2 books in that series. And then the third one I didn't really enjoy. So she's a bit hit and miss, and I wasn't expecting that. That's partly why they were disappointing to me, was because I've just heard so many people talk about Diana Wynne Jones as like their favorite author. Black Leopard, Red Wolf by Marlon James. I've never read anything else by Marlon James. I know that he won like the National Book Award for some nonfiction that he wrote, and honestly, this book was disgusting. I wouldn't recommend it to anybody. I was expecting a fantasy with African mythology, and I think that probably was in there. But by the 3rd chapter, I just was over it already, like that fast. I really hated the narrator, unfortunately. It just was not for me. Maybe it's for other people. All of the critics were singing its praises, and then all the young women read this and went, ew. There's this really funny discussion video from the Name of the Book Club with Little Book Owl and some of the Australian booktubers where like none of them finished it. I don't think any of them finished it. And they were all like, yeah, this was gross and we didn't like it. They all love fantasy. It was like, this was not what we wanted or expected. And it's not like they don't like crazy messed up fiction, like some of them really do, and none of them liked it. They all hated it. And then there is The Man Who Was Thursday. Now, I didn't know when I picked up the audiobook of this that this was going to be the most confusing book I've ever read in my life. Like, I guess I should have sat down with the physical copy and a nice introduction, maybe one with footnotes. I just wasn't expecting this to be what it was. I think I just was expecting something different, but that wasn't really the fault of the book, and I certainly am not giving up on G.K. Chesterton. I really want to read his Orthodoxy, and I really want to reread this as well, and see if maybe if I'm sitting down with a copy of it, I can understand it better than I did on audiobook. Because, like, I've heard it referred to as, like, a book for children, and I was like, well, if I didn't get it, how would a kid get it? The Unknown Americans. I listened to this on audiobook. It's about immigrants from a bunch of different places. And this wasn't a bad book, again, like most of these, with a couple exceptions. It was just very quiet. It didn't have humor, and I didn't find it very exciting, but I did enjoy some of the characters in it. There is a character with a TBI. I don't think it was worth all the praise that everyone was giving it. Like, I've read better books about minorities for sure. Although I am looking for more books about minorities that are really good. If you have any recommendations, I would love to read them. I've already read quite a bit of older African American literature, like The Bluest Eye, Beloved, some of Uncle Tom's Cabin. I read a couple books about people who escaped the slave trade, but I would love to read more like Hispanic literature. I would love to read more newer African American literature, like, or Native American, that's not like really modern in the sense that there's just like tons of swearing and stuff. So if you have any recommendations like that, I would love to check some out. And the other thing about The Unknown Americans is it kind of felt like a young adult book. I don't know if it was a young adult book, but I wasn't expecting it to be one, and it really felt like one. So just throwing that out there. And finally, we have Forgotten God by Francis Chan, and my husband and I were reading this together, and we just kind of found it to be really basic, and we weren't really learning anything. We did have some great discussions while we were reading it. It did provoke some discussion, mostly because we just like to talk. We didn't finish this wholly. My favorite thing was there were these stories about people in it before every chapter of the Holy Spirit working in their lives, and those were really cool. I guess the book was worth checking out just for those things. And that is all for this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I would love to hear about your most disappointing reads from 2019. Just complain a little bit in the comments. What kind of ended up being on the lower end of your rating scale that you were expecting to be on the higher end, and your reasons why. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, leave me a comment, subscribe, and if you want to get notified every time I make a new video, go ahead and hit the little bell icon off in the corner. I'll see you soon with a bunch of those review videos that I've been promising you.